Hey everyone, welcome to Animation Fundamentals 1. So if you're in this course, I'm guessing you're probably either taking some kind of college animation program, whether that's Seneca College, Sheridan, CalArts, Ringling, something like that, then you're in the right place. So first of all, welcome, and so hopefully you'll have a lot of time before you're going to be handing in your portfolio. I recommend at least 6 months prior to the portfolio submission date to start preparing. So ideally you'll have that, or at least some amount of that, whether it's 1 or 2 months or whatever. Anything is better than doing it the month of. You don't want to be stuck in that scenario. So throughout this course, I'm going to be guiding you through each step of the process for the Sheridan Animation Portfolio. So just a little bit about me first. My name is Garth Laidlaw, and I studied at Sheridan College, taking the BA animation program, the 4-year program, not the 1-year post-grad computer animation program. And so I applied multiple times when I was first trying to get into Sheridan, but there was also way less resources available when I was applying. So I applied straight from high school. So when I was in my grade 12 year, I somehow mustered up a portfolio and submitted that and got rejected pretty badly. I remember losing a lot of hope in that process. But then the next year, I applied to Sheridan and I got into Art Fundamentals, which is sort of an introductory art program year where you do a wide variety of different things, not just for animation. And the nice thing about it was that I had access to the school to see what it was like, and to the animation wing to be able to see what kind of art the animators were doing. It was always put up in the hallway, I remember, and it was always so beautiful to go see it. So it was really nice to be even around that. You kind of, by osmosis, you get a lot of the kind of tips and tricks of the trade of what it is like to be in animation. So that was really great. But what it also gives you is a lot of access to life drawing, which is awesome, because that's some of the weaker areas of portfolios typically are life drawing, storyboarding, and usually some kind of perspective, which sort of there's a lot of perspective used in storyboarding as well, but the layout part of the portfolio is often a little weaker too. So in this Animation Fundamentals 1, we're going to go through the first half of the portfolio, and in Animation Fundamentals 2, we're going to be going through the other half of the portfolio. So I hope you're ready, and I hope you're excited to jump into making some artwork. So there's going to be such a wide variety of different things, and I'll give you all of my tips and tricks that I have at my disposal from having both applied multiple portfolios and also having been through the whole program. And then also recently, the portfolio is a little different than when I applied, so I've done a whole bunch of research into what the current portfolio expectations are. And also, there's a lot of students that have successful portfolios that have submitted their portfolios online, so that you can kind of check it out and just kind of have a look at what their artwork is like. And that's incredibly handy. That wasn't really the same when I was applying. There wasn't really... YouTube was a thing. I'm not that old, but it wasn't so proliferous that everyone was kind of posting their artwork and editing and things like that. Like, those skills are much more common now. So it's awesome to see all the successful portfolios that are submitted, and hearing from a lot of the tips and tricks that they have too. So this isn't just my own experience through the portfolio. I've done a whole bunch of research into seeing what other people have said too, and how they got in. So hopefully throughout these 8 weeks, I can help you get in. I would love for every one of my students to get in, but ultimately how you use your time, not just throughout this course, but then afterwards as well, is a huge determiner of your success getting into the program and then while being in the program. The number one tip that I've heard and that I've felt from my own experience, but also heard from a whole bunch of other students that did get in, was that the hardest thing to kind of surmount was time management. And that's part of why I built this course, really, so that it gives you some kind of structure, so that when you're applying, you'll have worked steadily week by week, gradually progressing, rather than trying to do one big push at the end. That's definitely not going to produce the best work. And so I'm going to help you build a plan for your portfolio, and as well as talk about the different philosophies that go into making your portfolio, and also the techniques for how to physically draw each piece. So hopefully this is a very well-rounded course, and I hope you're excited to get started as I am to teach you. All right, so our week 1 assignment is going to be hand drawing. So the hand drawing is the first part of the observational part of the portfolio. So the hand drawing is very literally a hand drawing, but how you draw your hand and also how you think about showing the 2 different poses of the hand drawing are incredibly important. So typically each year, how the hand drawing works is that it's an anticipatory action. So it's the hand about to do something and then doing that thing. So sometimes it's, people might draw throwing a dart, or I think one year they made it specifically pressing a button. So every now and then, depending on the year, they'll give you limitations for what the hand can be doing. But some general tips for going about your hand drawing are to think of having your 2 poses be varied, so that they're not just the same kind of motion. Like having a hand like this, for example, and then like this, you could do something a little bit more. You could change the angle. I've heard that having the inside of your palm as well as the back, and it, not obviously like this and then that, but something more interesting, can be a really big benefit. So that you're not just showing one single angle. So definitely change the angle. Don't draw a side pose like this, like a profile of your hand, because it's just not that interesting. So it's sort of a delicate mix of believability and expression. So believability meaning the hand looks like a hand. It has all the structural marks, and the anatomy makes sense for being a hand. A lot of people draw their hands too wide. That's a common thing. And then the sort of imagination part of it is or the expressibility part of it is making your hand drawing not look too rigid and make it look like it's really a real hand. It's not just drawn from a picture, or it's not too static. And so I'll give you some tips to think about, kind of even beginning the exercise and thinking about a lot of what poses you might choose. Another thing that I would recommend, and that is echoed by a lot of the students that I've looked at who have had very successful portfolios, is to just draw a lot of different hands. So draw your hand a whole bunch of different ways. Get a mirror so that you can get angles that you can't normally see of your own hand. I think even drawing other people's hands could be a good idea if they can hold a pose for as long as you need, because you want to do it from life, because it's going to look a little bit different if you're drawing it from a photo. And I've heard that generally do most of this, as much of this portfolio as you can from life. Obviously you can't do the character design from life, but because teachers can really tell. People draw differently when they're drawing from photos than when they're drawing from life. So just make sure that you're drawing from life to get the most accurate depiction of what you're seeing. Because depending on the lens and the specifications of the camera, it might distort aspects of it. Like if my hand is too close, then it might actually make certain things larger, depending on the lens, unless you know someone that is very good at photography. So yeah, draw your hand a lot of times. Like with this course, I'm giving you all the sort of bones so that you can take these tools and construct the whole skeleton of your portfolio. So, but I hope that in each of the exercises that we do in this course, for your actual portfolio, you'll do them multiple times. Ideally, in this 8-week course, you can maybe do each assignment multiple times, but I know that everyone has a lot of responsibilities and time isn't always completely available. But it is good to prioritize this, especially if you have some months before your portfolio. So if you could start and make a lot of drawings for each week by week exercise, I think that would be a great idea. You're only going to get better when you draw and think of I always tell students to think of their pencil mileage. So the amount of drawings their pencil is doing versus trying to make one perfect drawing. It's very, there's just plenty of room for error. And also from drawing it many times, from drawing the hand from all the different angles, you'll have really fully explored what is capable and how to make an interesting looking pose. Another thing that I would recommend that I haven't actually seen a lot of students mention is to look at classical poses of hands throughout art history. So look at some of the great artists from antiquity, for example, like Leonardo da Vinci, Raphael, Titian, people like that, first of all, were really, really skilled at drawing in general. But look at the way that they depict hands and bodies and forms for life drawing later. But for this week, we're just talking about hands. So look at the hand poses that they chose, because they had a great eye for choosing very like rhythmic, lyrical looking hands that are very expressive. So that's what I mean by you want to have a sense of expressibility, not just believability. Believability is just obviously making the hand look realistic, but beyond realism, how do you make it interesting? How do you make your hands look unique so that it's not just, any other portfolio? You want to stand out as much as you can. And on that notion of standing out, I think it's important to really think, depending on how much flexibility there is in each year's portfolio specifications for the hand drawing, to try your best to create a bit of a story there. So if it's pressing a button, you could just do, the simple like red button kind of thing, and they're just poking it, which isn't super interesting. Think of it more abstractly, like what kind of button? Where is the button? Is this like a button on a space station? Is it a button in some kind of imaginative place? Is it a button in heaven or hell or something like that? Something to give your drawings a little bit of extra flavor that isn't necessarily asked for. That's going the extra mile, right? And that'll also help you stand out and be unique among the many portfolios that are applying. So those are some of the things that I would think about when you're starting this exercise. But before you start, I'd like to kind of jump in and have a look at some successful portfolios so that you can have a bit of an idea of what's expected. And I'll also describe a little bit what I think some of their the measures of success for them getting in and doing well in their exercise was. So I'll see you on the other screen. Hey everyone, welcome back. So I just want to show you guys some examples of some artists' interpretations of hands. And there are so many different kinds, so I thought I'd run through some good examples and also point out some structural things in terms of drawing hands. And I'll also, a lot of these artists have some kind of instructional book. If anyone's interested in that, I will post the links on the course page, and you can have a look at those as well. It's always good to practice rather than just kind of drawing from life all the time. Also drawing from other artists' work is a great way to kind of improve, especially in terms of anatomy. You can't really just kind of look at anatomy, draw it, and hope to kind of digest all of that. You need to kind of practice it all the time. So I'll throw some resources at you if you'd like them. The first up here is George Bridgman, and his book is right here. And specifically on hands, he does a lot of different books for other things as well, like figure drawing and all that. But he draws in a very construction-y kind of way, where basically it looks like he's kind of building this hand as if it's a machine, and you can see all these different parts. Right? It's it's not exactly. This isn't how exactly you would see hands if you were to kind of just draw in a more natural sort of way. Sorry, 1 second here. There we go. So this is not like, you wouldn't just start drawing hands naturally this way. He draws them as if he's kind of trying to understand how they actually work. So everything is a bit exaggerated. The structure is really exaggerated. The underlying structures, so the bones that are underneath the skin, are emphasized in huge ways. You'll notice these huge bones here. It almost looks like a big leg femur bone or something. Super exaggerated. Knuckles are very exaggerated. The tendons that connect to the muscles are very emphasized. But although it's exaggerated, it helps you to exaggeration helps you to see what is actually going on. And then when you're drawing on your own, you can simplify or connect the dots in some ways. So I'll show you an example of this. I'm just going to increase the density here. It's a little bit bigger of the canvas. So here, for example, is a really great drawing where like this, again, this isn't exactly how the muscles go, but basically it's quite correct. Like the main muscles of the hand, there's really there's lots of little muscles, but these are the two main ones of the palm. One connects up into your bone up here, the little pinky bone, and then the other connects to the thumb. So, and those kind of do a lot of the muscle and grabbing of the hand. So it's interesting that he's simplified it, but his simplification allows you to see it a little bit better. So that's helpful when you're learning. So a lot of people recommend students that are just starting to just kind of sketch, like literally copy Bridgman's drawings as a way to kind of understand anatomy and get a little bit better at drawing hands. So that's one way that you could pick up one of his books and then just kind of go through and copy, just sketch, make little studies of his work. It'll gradually help you to understand more. Also, his use of overlap. I'm going to mention overlap a lot in this course because that alludes to what Sheridan means when they're asking for a structure. So here you can see that this overlap here goes up there, and then this last piece of the thumb muscle kind of comes out there. And what that does, and then there's this other overlap over here, which is really nice. So when I simplify this, and then you'd see probably some there, like that, basically. You might see a little bit of overlap there. These little overlapping pieces, however insignificant they seem, they really help indicate the rest of the structure. So if I hit the original here, then we get a sense of this thumb moving back into space versus just being static and flat. Whereas, if I just duplicated this and got rid of these little things, suddenly it feels like just a shape. It's just a flat shape with no real, who knows what that could be, right? So these little bits where there's some degree of overlap actually help to indicate that the direction and movement of the form. So knowing your anatomy when drawing hands, it can be quite helpful. And that is a constant study. That's something that you're going to be continually using again and again. Even this little piece down here, this is the end of that big main thumb muscle, the one we saw up here. It's on this side, right? So it's folding in here. Here's this your radius here, and the little ulna, wrist bone on the other side. That radius is right here, and then this muscle is right out of there. So yeah, it all sort of connects. And as you start to just kind of copy his drawings, you'll start to understand a little bit more how hands move. But yeah, Bridgman's drawings are very blocky. It's like you're drawing a bunch of machines, basically. It's kind of neat. This is also Bridgman, slightly different kind of style, but still Bridgman. Here I'm just gonna do the same thing that I did before. So yeah, a little bit more movement and less construction-y. They're a little bit more like hands as you see them versus hands that are like built like machines, but they're still very expressive. These are looser than I would do for a portfolio, but these are great studies to learn from. Also, he has a great sense of hand posing. So notice how, for example, this could have been much more boring if you just did this kind of thing. Like this, and then just had the hand go back and had the rest of the fingers kind of behind that finger. So you might see little bits of them, but not really. See, that's really not interesting. But if you just turn the hand slightly, like he did in his drawing, then we see a little bit of that other side of the hand, not just this side that's facing us. We see how this form stretches across these two shapes. So that's great. We see a 3/4 view, basically. Like if you think of you're drawing your character that we're going to be doing later in this course, there's the front side 3/4 and then back 3/4, and those 3/4 views are really the beauty shots. Those are the shots that show you a more accurate, really, depiction of what your character is going to look like. Same with hands. So a 3/4 view of a hand is quite interesting. So that's something to think about when you're drawing your hands. Whereas like a straight on hand like this, not super interesting. Side, not super interesting. Back, you want some variation in between. Like, and then think about moving the fingers slightly, right? So like these fingers, notice how they're all staggered a little bit. This one's open, this one's open. These two are together to add that variation. This one even more so. These two are kind of like moving this way. These two almost look like they're linked moving that way. So there's a sense of movement and motion there. So think about how you pose each of those fingers. And in this case, if you notice these fingers here, this one looks like it's actually going back into space. So if this finger is straight up like that, then you wouldn't even see this, right? It would be off. But that wouldn't be a very interesting pose. So he brought that finger, it's still going back into space, but it's coming down a little bit so that we do see a little indication of that finger coming out there. So even though it's going back into space, it's not being completely covered. So this is part of what makes a kind of beautiful pose, is to have each element doing its own thing and perhaps twisting in some ways. Like in figure drawing, we'll talk about what makes a good pose, and often it's like body twists and just variation of limbs, perhaps working together to create some kind of musicality in the pose. So it's exactly the same with the hand. You want your hands to be really visually engaging and unique and interesting poses. So this is kind of how I would think about going with this. Here are some of Leonardo da Vinci's hands that he's drawn. It's also interesting to notice the little studies that you can see here and there. He drew a lot. And notice how like each finger is doing something slightly different. So this one's going that way. This one is it's almost parallel in the upper half, but then it bends more on the bottom half, and it starts to kind of do that. And then this finger looks like it's almost covered. Again, more variation. That one's like you don't see too much of it. You see a little tiny bit. And then the pinky is arced up more than the other fingers. So each finger is slightly different than the previous one. So think about that when you're posing your hand. Even this pose, which again could have been not that interesting, but what makes it more interesting is that we see this knuckle behind and this knuckle behind, so that there's a sense of depth there. And then here we have the main prominent finger, and then we see an indication of the other finger behind it. And then there's a finger that's even sticking up here. So all of that helps to make that more interesting, where it could have otherwise been very boring. Also a nice bend of the wrist too. That's something to think about. And the hands are kind of coming towards us. Like this arm is quite foreshortened, and then this hand's kind of cutting off a bunch of the wrist there. So having things that are coming towards you, that's also something that a lot of students aren't going to do because it's difficult to see that angle. But you could always look in a mirror or draw the hands of a friend. No one's going to know if they're your hands or not, right? Just some more of Leonardo's hands. Yeah. It's just interesting to see the variety. I really like this one. Oh, I guess this is a black and white document. There we go. I like this one because, again, each finger is doing a kind of different thing there, and some are going back into space. We're not seeing too much of the palm, though, so you don't see a lot of information. This would be a great hand for the portfolio. We get to see a lot of different information and variety there. This one's not super interesting. I wouldn't do something so straight on as that. I would probably turn this to an angle a little bit. So that was more like that. Right? So then we're seeing a little bit more of the wrist on this side and then there. This is a bit more too static. This one's nice. We see a good sense of the outer side of the palm and that thumb there too. This is a good pose. Look at those fingers. They're doing very different motion there, and we still see a lot of the structure too. This one doesn't quite include enough. I would probably avoid anything like that where you don't see most of the fingers are hidden. Probably avoid something like that. Here are some of J.C. Leindecker's hands. He was an American illustrator in the 20th century, so we've jumped forward several centuries here. So his hands are really great. Even here, right? just a simple carrying. You know, when people draw that, they often just draw this kind of thing, right? Maybe you see the thumb underneath, and then just like fingers like that. Super uninteresting. Look at the amount of structure here. You've got the ulna, which really protrudes, especially when the wrist is carrying a lot of weight like that, because the muscles flatten out further up the arm. It's a lot to explain, but basically, yeah, when you have a muscle that's flexing like that, you really see that bone bulging out there, and then the radius there as well, and then this nice overlap here again with that thumb muscle really coming out there, and then we've got the bone of that knuckle, and then the tendon. We can even see an indication of the tendon there, and then up to the thumb. And even the fingers, like even as something as boring as this, we still see some variation. So we see a little bit of that finger behind, a lot of that finger, and then this pinky's almost mirroring this finger. Knowing that, you know, a bag is curved, so you can't really have fingers completely even. If anything, it would be something more like that, which is sort of what we're seeing, right? These ones are down further than those other ones, so they're up a little bit more, tucked away. We also see a lot of internal structure here, right? You don't need this much. This is a very low body fat kind of character here, because you can see all those little tendons and everything. Don't necessarily need that much detail, but we do want some structure, and I'll talk about this more when we actually start drawing. Here's another really great hand. Look at how graphic this is in some ways. Really clear shapes. And I like that the fingers are really extending a lot, so it means those tendons are really working, because it's extending back. And even there's small little variations in these two fingers that otherwise seem very parallel. And then here we've got that knuckle exaggerated a little bit. And then a nice little pull, a tension line there, pulling this pinky down. And then he's even included little muscles there. So a lot of information here. Really great. That's an awesome hand pose. I love the variation in this hand pose actually over here. Just how this finger is kind of straight, and then this one's down a little bit, and it creates this very straight line, like that. And then this one's bending a little bit. It's almost twisting a little bit. There's a little bit of flex in fingers, right? So it's doing something like that. It's just like a nice variety and really good design. Leyendecker was a great designer. You know, he was an illustrator, so makes sense. This is a great hand here. Very simple yet effective. How the fingers kind of coming out and then going back and then down, and then these two are in parallel. So yeah, again, not the most interesting, but also like what can you really do when you're holding something like this? You could vary the fingers a little bit. The pinky could have been perhaps bent down this way a little bit, down here, and this finger could have been going back. But yeah, that would have added a little bit of variety. That's a great hand, but a little straight on. I would have changed the angle a little bit probably. Yeah. You won't be doing something like this because you're probably only going to be drawing one hand and then that hand doing something else. Here's Andrew Loomis. So this is largely the way that Sheridan really teaches hands, on a very basic level, although you want to have a little bit more real information than this. You want to see some creases and skin folds and things like that. But this is fundamentally what they want you to realize, is that there's definite planes to drawing a hand. There's the front, side, back, and other side. And they want you to be aware that even when the hand is doing all kinds of different things, that you're aware of which side is facing which way, right? So that way that the thumb doesn't feel like it's contorting a strange way when the rest of the hand is going one way. You know, you want to really be clear on the direction and like the way that the hand is rotating and moving. So to think of it in terms of blocks like this, again, simplify some of that information, especially when you're not extremely aware of all the anatomy. Even if you can just get the planes facing the right direction, depending on the movement and what the hand is doing, then you're doing great. And then you can add structure elements on top of that. But to think of it in this very broken down, planar way, I find can be quite helpful. All right, these are some more Loomises. A little bit more. So Andrew Loomis was also an American illustrator in the 20th century and very famous for doing all these helpful books. So yeah, these are a little bit more detailed than his previous ones, obviously, but the nice thing about them is they include a lot of information, but not too much. This one in particular is really great. This is a really challenging pose, obviously, because you've got a lot of foreshortening happening. Especially this area is usually the area that students would struggle with, because you have a lot of shapes here that are all folded in. One thing that, I don't know if this is helpful to everyone, but one thing that I learned about doing something like this is you look at all the ellipses. So ellipses is just a circle in space. And so you first have this most noticeable ellipse here. That is the sort of the pad of your thumb. And then there's that knuckle. That's another kind of ellipse back here. And then you've got the next knuckle, basically. It's over here. And you kind of just draw through as if it's like an X-ray. A lot more on that soon once we start drawing as well, because that's sort of how we're doing this whole portfolio. And then there's sort of the connection to the larger thumb muscle here, and then there's that larger thumb muscle. So, and then you can just basically erase, like you do this for your own kind of construction, but then now that we know, now we can just erase certain bits, and you'll notice that it starts to almost make a thumb. But you leave some of it because you want to see some of that structure, like that, for example. So I've strategically left some overlapping lines there to still convey. Oh, and this one, obviously, we don't need that one as much. But that's very similar to that kind of shape there. So you just think about it as like ellipses that are coming at you. It helps in terms of the perspective too. But yeah, these fingers are. I would, if you were doing something like this for a portfolio, I would make the fingers doing something different. And whenever I'm sketching, by the way, especially early on, I think about, because you know that obviously the fingers are broken down into these segments, 3 main segments, 2 for the thumb. So I kind of think about it that way, and that's kind of how I begin posing. Or you could just pose and draw exactly from your hand. That's another way, but sometimes it can be helpful to sketch too, right? So I'll do something like that, and then that way, then I can figure out, all right, how can I make this work? Something like that. Something like that, right? So that it just lets me kind of pose the hand before I'm committing to it. Also, this, I like this little depiction here where he exaggerates those knuckles to makes them stand out a bit more. Obviously, if you look at my finger, you don't see those little bumps, but there are those knuckles there, right? So it just helps to be aware that there's these little marks kind of. And if you need to exaggerate a little bit to put a little extra structure in, that's not a bad thing. You might want to err on the side of exaggerating your anatomy just a bit to make those structural points very, very clear. Here's a nice kind of breakdown of a process. Oops. It's just like from very, very fluid. This is almost like a gesture. This is what you do in like a 3 to 5 minute kind of pose. I would even probably group those fingers. Just like you get the general essence of the pose, and then slowly getting more and more structure on the hand, bulking out a little bit. And then, so this one is almost like an anatomy book, kind of look at what a hand would do. And then this one back here is added those extra little fat bits or muscle segments on the finger. So like things like that, a little bit more realistic. This is what we actually look like, but this is often what we see in anatomy textbooks. So you want basically somewhere in between these two. You want a certain element of the underlying structure visible, the underlying structure being this one, with all of its angles and everything indicated. You want a little bit of that indicated, just even as an underdrawing. Often, if you look at successful animation portfolios, you'll see that the underdrawing is drawn in like a blue, which is a little bit lighter, which makes the lead over top stand out more. So they'll draw they'll draw all of this in blue, and then over top of that, like they'll do this drawing basically. So then they'll actually, I'll just grab this. So it'll be something like that over top of that drawing there. So you'll still see some of the structure beneath, but you also still see the realistic muscle and fat of that's on a hand, which is a nice kind of mix of those two. So that's how I would think about it. When I start drawing again, I'll go over this a little bit more clearly. This is a beautiful rendered hand by Norman Rockwell. And oil paint, I'm pretty sure, of all things. So let's see. Yeah, it's amazing the amount of diversity that you can have within a hand, like all these different shapes. Each knuckle has its own shape. That one almost has like a point there because of how the fold is kind of going into that stronger knuckle there. So it's just neat how he's created a very planar rendering of the hand with really strong shadows and structures that make the more opaque parts really stand out. So it's really, really beautiful. Here are some of John Singer Sargent's hands. It's a little bit of a low quality file, but also very, very simple but very elegant. They have a really good sense of rhythm to them. But again, these are often two hands, so you obviously won't be able to do something like that for yours. Here's a nice, again, really simple sketch and fairly simple shadows. These are great drawings of a hand. You won't be shading for yours though. Make sure you don't, because the portfolio doesn't require or want any shading. I think because it maybe clouds up the structure. People may darken it too much and start rendering a hand too fully, and that's more of, I think that's a thing for the illustration portfolio, but not so much for animation. They want to see the real underlying structure. Here are some nice structural elements indicated. This little ulna bone there, again, that's the bone that connects the forearm, and then there's the big, larger radius on the other side. And yeah, very clearly indicated knuckles. These little, again, might have been exaggerated a little bit, might have been a little bit of a smoother hand, but again, you want to show that structure, so I would recommend you do the same. Yeah, so that's all the ones that I wanted to show you. So next we will jump into some drawing. Hey everyone, so here I am. I'm going to do a drawing of my hand in an interesting pose. So I'm just going to do one to kind of show you the general technique to go about this exercise. So as I mentioned, we're going to be drawing sort of the construction lines as well as the final, the silhouette and the interior lines as we see them in reality. So I'm probably going to be doing something like this. You might not exactly see it in this shot, but I'll just show you sort of how I'm going to go about this. Also, I'm using a color erase pencil here, so you can see this is going to be a blue pencil stroke, and it's going to be a little lighter. Although I might press a little harder so that you can see it on this camera. So first, I'm thinking there's a lot of different techniques for going about starting. I'm going to do a very, very light sketch first of the whole hand, and then I'm gradually going to start to refine that a little bit. This way, if I make a mistake, which I will, I'm sure, I can refine it easily as I go. So I'm making lots of independent strokes, but I'm not going back and forth a lot. I'm making a lot of sort of independent marks like that. So that's what's making these shapes. This way it doesn't look too hairy. You don't want that really hairy look from going back and forth a lot of times. So I'm going to draw a little circle for the thumb knuckle here. And one thing that really helps this kind of drawing is to look at the negative space and the negative shapes between objects. So, for example, between the fingers, look at the shapes between the fingers. For me, since the thumb is sort of protruding out from the inner part of the inner silhouette of the hand, I can look at this thumb mound here, this larger thumb muscle, and how much space is between this edge and that outer edge. You want to constantly be measuring things like that. Same with this side. I'm going to look and say, is that enough space from here to there? Sort of all these little mental check-ins to make sure I'm on the right track. And then another little knuckle. So just a very rough sketch. And this is a perfect moment, since I have the one tip of my thumb here, I can use this tip to measure out. So I can literally take my pencil and kind of put that, I'm going to measure out the angle from the tip of my thumb to the tip of my index finger, and it's something like this. There, so now I know that this is a little too far along. I'm not going to get too correction-y right now, though, because that's not really the point of what I'm doing in this moment. So here I'm just drawing basically a skeleton of what the fingers are doing. And then I can fill in the volumes afterwards. Great. Just making sure that you can see everything there. Okay, so I'm nearly done this first sketch. So notice how when I'm drawing any kind of cross contour line, which means across the form, like this wrist line, for example, it's interesting to notice that your wrist is rounded. It's not flat. I'm not drawing, if the wrist was like this, and I draw the wrist line across going like that, that doesn't make much sense. That's a two-dimensional form. There's no roundness here. Whereas we're going to be drawing, if there's any kind of intersection, for example, a very common thing is to draw ellipses at the joints. This is a very animation-y kind of style where we're literally making little visual marks of where this form is going to bend. That's basically what you're doing when you're drawing these little ellipses. It's kind of it lets you see through the form a little bit to see what's going on. Okay, so that's, a lot of people include this in their final drawing. But some people will also include some of the understructure of the actual bones, for example, like that. You don't have to go too intense about it, but including little bits of anatomy here and there can be nice. Again, it just is further demonstrating that you understand what is happening with the form. When I show you some of the final work of some successful portfolios, you'll see that they included a lot of those inner structural bits. So the more you know about hand anatomy when you go into this, the better. But you can even look that up online a little bit to get a general understanding of what the bones are doing in your hand. So I'm overemphasizing a little bit the shapes in the wrist here. I made a bit more of a point there to indicate the radius, the bone that is at that side of the wrist. And then also I have a little overlap here because I know the ulna kind of goes in behind there. And then there's often some tendons. I see a very subtle suggestion of tendons here on my hand, but not a whole lot. Oh, I've moved a little bit. That's going to happen. It's very natural. Yeah, okay. So now I've got my overall sketch broken down into these bendable forms. I might draw a little ellipse here. So this one's the pinky is kind of coming towards me a little bit. So I'm going to see almost full circles, ellipses. Whereas these ones up here, these are more flattened ellipses because they're not facing the camera. They're kind of going off in this direction. Whereas this pinky is kind of like wrapping up towards, it's almost facing me. In fact, this should probably be brought up a bit there. Okay, so that's basically what's happening. So it's really coming around towards the camera. So I'm going to see those indications of those full ellipses. Okay, so now in my second go through of this drawing, now I'm going to have an even closer look, and I'm going to start to define forms in even more detail. So for example, one thing that I didn't do in my first pass is create the thumb flap here that connects to up here. It's almost like a shape that just kind of connects in there. And then I'm also going to draw the pads of the palm of each finger, which I didn't really indicate in that first go around. Again, this kind of detail, it's better to go get at in your second go through, because then you're looking for more detail. It's not as general. Yeah, so that one is behind this thumb here. And this one actually kind of bends down like this. And then there's quite a big crease here created by two pads of my palm colliding. There's a lot of little details like this I started to indicate here in my thumb, especially down here. I'm not going to draw all of those. I'm going to draw some of them just to indicate that there is some creases being created. But yeah, that's very common. We're going to talk more about this throughout the course, but with detail, in animation, you really want to compress detail as much as possible. So by that I mean, there's like tons of little lines like this. Just draw some of them to indicate that texture, but not necessarily draw every single little one. It's both an efficiency and design choice to do that. Efficiency being, if you're animating something, you don't want to draw every single little line on a character. And design, because it's actually often more, it looks nicer to have less detail, but the rest of the detail is just kind of lightly indicated versus drawn in explicitly. Okay, so I'm starting to darken some of these construction lines a little bit. Also drawing some more interior lines, especially that wrist line. I can see it on my hand quite strongly. So I'm especially darkening the areas where there is some kind of form protruding from the skin, like when there's a knuckle, for example, as you saw in the many examples of the masterworks that I was showing. But also notice that I'm keeping a nice diverse line quality. So not everything is darkened to the same amount. Some things are darker than others, especially this thumb. As it's coming forward, I'll want to darken a lot of these forms so that it feels like it's coming off the page a little bit, more so than the fingers behind it. I think I drew the thumb a little too long in that first pass. If you really look and you really have a good eye for noticing little subtle details, which is great for art, you'll notice that the thumb, well, all of your fingers really are not straight. They're not completely, there's straight elements like here, for example, as created probably by the tendon connecting these two joints. But there's a lot of curvature. You see there's like the straight here, a curve here, round, curves all the way down here, and then it actually kind of it goes in there a little bit. So there's a lot of shapes. You just have to be really articulate with noticing them and really develop your eye for that. Oh, I've shifted my hand dramatically. I'm going to trust my original drawing here. It's going to guide me through. You also just kind of have to use your brain too, though. Like, do certain things look too long? Do they look too short? So yeah, as I was saying, these ellipses that sometimes carry into the form seem to happen more when there's something coming towards you. Whereas up here, these little creases, they're still going through the form, but they're not rounding as much because it's not facing me. They're kind of going across the form a little bit more. So here I'm getting into more of the actual what the skin is doing. So those bits where there's a fatty pad might emphasize the knuckles a little bit. So this is anything but straight. I hope this is clear that each of these segments has quite a lot of little detail if you really notice it. So I'm actually not darkening the flat areas as much because that's easy to connect. It's just a matter of literally connecting the dots. I'm mostly darkening the areas where something is happening. Something in the form is changing when there's a slight curve, especially because there's a knuckle here, for example. There we go. I'm not worried about the nails yet either. That's kind of the details that you'd add at the end of it. Now, when there's something like this where you're seeing mostly the underside of this finger, you want to be really careful not to give too much of a big bump here. Otherwise, it's going to seem almost like broken because we're seeing mostly the bottom. So that knuckle is going to be slightly minimized, actually. So it's really just a slight indication of that there. You don't want to have it jutting out too much. It's going to seem almost like an arthritic kind of hand that is experienced a lot. Actually, whenever you're just kind of not sure what to draw and you're kind of stuck, I often draw my hands. It's a nice exercise just to kind of do because you've always got them with you. You don't always have a mirror to draw like a self-portrait or something, but you always are able to just kind of draw your hands. It's also just a great warm-up if you're going to be doing another kind of drawing. All right, so this finger doesn't look good to me, this one behind the thumb. It often is difficult because you're looking at the shapes that it creates behind the thumb, and sometimes the thumb form itself kind of messes up your eye, your anatomy, when you're just kind of drawing away. So I'm going to try to fix that now. Yeah, it's just the tilt was a bit wrong on this last joint. So one thing I need to be careful of here is that this almost looks like I'm looking at the top of the nail, as if like I'm seeing this finger like this. Like I'm seeing, which would be that would totally make it look like, if I'm seeing the top of this and the underside of these fingers, then that would be completely disharmonic with what's going on. So this is where the nail can really help, as can these little lines that are helping to indicate the direction that things are flowing. So in this case, I only see a tiny bit of this nail. It's basically like that. So that helps, because then I'm like, okay, now we understand that we're seeing the bottom of this hand. Some of the portfolios that are successful, you'll notice, will even indicate, sort of like that Andrew Loomis drawing that we looked at earlier, the edges between the top and the side and the bottom, for example. They'll actually draw almost like boxes around the forms, like that. You can do that. I see that quite a lot, if it helps to indicate what's going on. But also just the detail itself will help that. I see a tiny bit of that nail, not really that much. And then I see a little bit of this nail at the bottom too. So these nails are really giving you a lot of the information that you need to know which direction those fingers are facing. Yeah, so that's looking pretty good. One thing I would consider is that it looks like I've drawn this pinky a little bit too small, although it is kind of coming at the camera. So that's the mental trick, right? Is it it's supposed to be coming at the camera, aka my eye. I keep saying camera. I'm used to working with scenes of animation, but I might just enlarge it just so that it's a little bit more clear, that it's not that much smaller than the rest of these fingers. Even this one to me feels a little bit small behind the thumb, but it's not too bad. If anything, I just make it a little bit longer maybe in this direction. It takes a while to get used to making all these little adjustments when things don't feel right. Sometimes when you're just starting, I know something may not feel right, but you're not exactly sure why. So you just start kind of changing things arbitrarily. So that's kind of why I'm here, and why I'll be looking at your drawings this week to try to catch you in some of those things. Because when you start drawing for a long time, it's hard to see it objectively. You almost have to take a break away from it and come back to it before you can kind of see it fresh again. And so my eyes and having a look at it with my skill level of drawing will help to break you out of some of that too. All right, so that's my hand. So notice how there's a lot of softness and hardness from time to time. So the knuckles are more angular, and then the connection between those knuckles, where there's a little bit of fat, a little bit of muscle, are a little bit softer. They're actually, I've rounded a lot of the areas more. I like to have hands that look very hand-like, not like robotic, claws or something. So that's something that you want to keep in mind, is you don't want it to look, you want to indicate the structure, but you don't want to make it completely cold and lifeless feeling, I guess. So what's nice about this pose is that this is the palm pose. So the next pose I would do would be probably the back of the hand to some degree, while still seeing a lot of the details like fingers and stuff. But also I have the thumb cuts the form in half, right? It's dividing this form. So there's this side and that side. So that gives it a good sense of three-dimensional form. So what I would do last, if this was my finished portfolio drawing, for example, I would then, I use a mechanical pencil, but really any pencil will do. But I do recommend, whether you're using mechanical or an actual pencil, is to use a B lead. Because you'll get a little bit of darkness, which can be nice to indicate these forms in a clearer way. So now I'm just going to literally draw over top. You could have your hand still in the pose, or you can kind of just, this is sort of what I think of as just the refining. This is where I'm really picking these lines. So, and I'm darkening certain areas and keeping others quite light. So again, line quality is a big thing. Sometimes you don't even need to draw all of the line, even if you just start it and let the mind connect it to its next point. That's a great stylistic thing to have. So this thumb here, this is going to be quite a bit darker because it's kind of jutting out at us. If you ever need to double check something, you can always just kind of set your hand back up in that pose. So they say no shading in the Sheridan Portfolio. These are all just line drawings. But what you'll want to make sure of is that your lines are descriptive enough so that you basically don't need shading. If you have a thick and thin quality to your lines, then they'll do a great job of indicating the forms so that you just don't need to shade it that much. It still has a sense of three-dimensional quality to it. Might even add the odd line to emphasize the knuckle, the bone that's created there. Again, like I said at the beginning, I'm making lots of little independent strokes. I'm doing that basically really quickly. So I'm not actually going back and forth like this because that creates a not so nice line. I'm making independent strokes like that. Might include some of these creases here created on knuckles. So this line's this pinky's gonna be drawn a little bit lighter with a lighter line than my thumb, so that it recedes into the background a little bit. If I was handing this in, I might have even have just erased some of that colored pencil, the color erase pencil, which these color erases can actually erase, which is nice, just to make it a little bit cleaner. In fact, some people they'll have their sketch on one page, and then they'll get a paper on top of that one, put that down, and then kind of clean it up basically, while still maintaining those structural elements. So they'll start with a blue pencil yet again, but you have a previous drawing to work from. So they'll put a paper on top and then just start sketching and making the ellipses, same as they would with their constructive drawing initially, but they just make it a little bit cleaner. I've managed to keep it relatively clean though in this drawing alone, so I'm not going to worry too much about that right now. And also this is just a demonstration. So here I really want to have a nice light line there, not too heavy. So the line quality, you can get so far just with the line quality alone, right? It really helps to add volume. Generally, internal lines are a little bit lighter, but not always. Sometimes there's quite strong shapes created by them, and you need some extra dark. Like in this one in particular, since it's a fold of skin that is kind of connecting to the thumb. So I want to make sure it's dark to indicate that there's actually an edge there. There's an edge of skin versus this line here, which is just really a crease created by skin folds. So I'm just continuing to be aware of the changing line quality occasionally to help either push form away or bring it forward. That's basically what line quality does. I think I've overemphasized this knuckle a little bit, so I'm just going to push that back. See, again, I gave it that almost like sickly looking feel to it. Not quite realistic. Okay, so overall, I'm pretty happy with that. It has a sense of three-dimensional form. Some things that contribute to the structure of this are the emphasized knuckles, the plane changes, sometimes a little bit exaggerated, like right there. Darker lines with forms that are coming closer to you, so this thumb's in front of those fingers behind, so it has darker lines in it. And even these, the creases in the fingers help to indicate that round form, not just kind of going across, like I mentioned earlier, which will really flatten it out. So overall, it feels pretty three-dimensional. I'm pretty happy with that. I don't know what this hand is about to do, so it's not quite the same exercise as what you'd have in the portfolio, but this is generally how I would go about drawing a hand. So I hope that helps, and good luck with your homework this week.